A new camera can solve a real problem. It can focus faster. It can work better in difficult light. It can give you a feature your current camera simply does not have. It can also be a very expensive way to avoid asking a less exciting question. What is actually stopping me from making the photograph? That question is the reason this podcast exists. Photographers are surrounded by advice. Use this autofocus mode. Never use that exposure mode. Raise the ISO. Do not raise the ISO. Shoot RAW. Shoot JPEG. Use back button focus. Do not use back button focus. Buy a faster lens. Buy a new camera. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you are still trying to make a photograph you actually like. The problem is not that all photography advice is bad. The problem is that advice without context becomes noise. A setting that works perfectly for one photographer may be completely wrong for another photographer standing in different light, photographing a different subject, trying to create a different result. A new camera may solve a genuine limitation. It may also solve nothing, because the disappointing photograph was caused by shutter speed, timing, position, light, depth of field, or a decision made before the camera ever entered the conversation. That is what this podcast is about. Diagnosis before blame. Welcome to Your Camera is Not the Problem, the photography podcast for anyone tired of confusing settings, questionable advice, and the feeling that better gear will somehow fix everything. I'm photographer and educator Joseph Nuzzo of ShutterSpeak. Around here, we talk about the decisions, skills, mistakes, and occasional equipment problems that shape our photography, because sometimes the camera is the problem, but usually it's not. And better photography starts before the shutter button. I have spent a large part of my life working in situations where preparation, observation, and timing matter. As a photographer, I have worked in press photography, sports, concerts, events, and professional real estate photography. I've photographed situations where things happen quickly. The light is less than cooperative, the subject does not wait, and there is usually no interest in hearing a detailed explanation of why the camera menu was confusing. I've also spent years teaching photographers through ShutterSpeak and ShutterSpeak Academy, with a particular focus on Nikon Z cameras, and teaching has shown me something important. Most photographers are not struggling because they are incapable of understanding photography. They are struggling because they have been given pieces of information without being shown how those pieces fit together. They know a fast shutter speed can freeze movement. They know a wide aperture can blur a background. They know high ISO can introduce noise. They know continuous autofocus is used for movement. But knowing what a setting does is not the same as knowing when it matters. That gap is where frustration begins. A photographer changes the autofocus mode because the photograph was blurry, even though the real problem was subject movement. Another photographer refuses to raise the ISO because someone said high ISO ruins image quality, and ends up with a clean-looking photograph that is completely blurred. Someone else switches to manual mode because they were told that that's what serious photographers use, then spends the entire shoot chasing changing light. The camera did exactly what it was told to. Unfortunately, what it was told to do made no sense for the situation. Experiences are part of the story behind this show. I wanted a place to have photography conversations that go beyond the quick answer. Not because every subject needs to become complicated, but because the useful answer is often one sentence longer than the popular answer. Use a fast shutter speed may be correct, but how fast? For what subject? At what focal length? Are you trying to freeze the subject, prevent camera movement, or both? Shoot manual may be useful advice, but what problem is manual exposure solving? Is the light consistent? Are you using flash? Is auto ISO active? What exactly needs to remain fixed? That extra context is often the difference between understanding a setting and simply copying it. So what are we going to talk about here? We are going to talk about photography. That sounds obvious, but I mean the entire process. We will talk about observation, timing, light, composition, backgrounds, movement, exposure, autofocus, editing, printing, and the decisions that turn a technically acceptable frame into a photograph that actually says something. We'll talk about why photographs are blurry, and we will avoid using out of focus as a label for every soft image. We'll separate autofocus failure from subject movement, camera movement, slow shutter speed, shallow depth of field, missed timing, lens behavior, and unrealistic expectations. Because those problems may look similar, but they require very different solutions. We'll talk about Nikon a lot. Shutter Speak has always had a strong Nikon Z focus, and many of the people listening will be Nikon photographers. We'll talk about Nikon autofocus, exposure, menus, lenses, firmware, flash, new products, and the features that are genuinely useful once you finally locate them. Somewhere inside every camera menu is a setting you forgot existed, and another setting whose name appears to have been selected by committee. We will work through both. But even when we use Nikon examples, many of the larger lessons will apply across camera brands. Shutter speed is still shutter speed. Depth of field is still depth of field. A distracting background does not become more cooperative because the camera has a different logo on the front. We'll also talk about the photography industry, new cameras, new lenses, software, editing tools, firmware, product announcements, marketing, trends, and the endless cycle of being told that whatever you bought last year is now standing between you and photographic greatness. When something new is released, we will not stop at asking whether it is better. New equipment usually is better in some way. The useful question is whether it is better in a way that matters to you. Does it solve a problem you actually have? How often does that problem happen? What does the solution cost? What else needs to change in your workflow? And could technique, lighting, support equipment, a different lens, or a better decision solve the same problem? That does not mean you need to defend every purchase. Photography is allowed to be enjoyable. You can buy a new lens because you want it. You do not need to appear before a committee and demonstrate operational necessity. But wanting something and needing something are different conversations, and both conversations are easier when we're honest about them. We will talk about gear fairly. This is not an anti-gear show. Sometimes the camera is guilty. Autofocus systems have limits. Lenses have limits. Batteries fail. Compatibility matters. Some cameras lack features that certain photographers genuinely need. Equipment can improve reliability, speed, image quality, comfort, and workflow. The point is not to pretend gear never matters. The point is to identify when it matters. We will talk about education too. Why photography can feel more confusing after watching 20 tutorials. Why universal settings fail. why photographers collect menu recommendations without understanding what they change, why manual mode is useful but does not serve as a professional membership card, why auto ISO is neither reckless nor mandatory, why back button focus can help some photographers without becoming rite of passage, and why the best answer in photography is often, "It depends," followed immediately by a clear explanation of what it depends on. There will also be the occasional tangent. Some will involve sports, concerts, teaching, hockey, real estate photography, creativity, missed photographs, old cameras, new cameras, and whatever unusual corner of the photography world deserves attention that week. The tangent still has to earn its place. This is a podcast, not a hostage situation, but photography connects to observation, preparation, technology, business, culture, and the way we learn. Sometimes the useful lesson is sitting slightly outside the camera bag. What can you expect from each episode? You can expect one central question. You can expect the question to be taken seriously without becoming needlessly complicated. You can expect practical examples, fair disagreement, and clear distinctions between a technical requirement, a good starting point, a personal preference, and a situational choice. You can expect me to challenge questionable advice without attacking the person who gave it. Most bad photography advice becomes popular because it works somewhere. The problem begins when "this worked for me" quietly turns into "everyone must do this." You can also expect honesty about equipment. If the camera is the problem, we'll say so. If the lens is the problem, we'll say so. If the setting is wrong for the situation, we will say so. And when the camera did exactly what the photographer asked, despite the request making very little sense, we will say that too. Most importantly, you should leave each episode with something useful to do. A test, a question, a setting to examine, a photograph to review, a decision to reconsider. The goal is not to give you more rules. The goal is to help you make better decisions when the rules stop working. So before the next episode, try this. Find one photograph that disappointed you. Describe the problem in one specific sentence. Not "the camera failed," not "the image is bad." Describe what actually happened. The background is sharp, but the subject is not. The entire image has directional blur. The eye is sharp, but the rest of the face falls outside of the depth of field. The exposure changed when the background changed. The autofocus system could not reliably follow the subject I regularly photograph. Specific problems lead to useful decisions. Vague frustration usually leads to a shopping cart. If this sounds like the kind of photography conversation you've been looking for, follow the podcast. We're going to talk about photography, Nikon, the industry, gear, education, mistakes, better decisions, and the occasional tangent that hopefully knows when to come home. Sometimes the camera will be the problem, but before we blame it, we are going to find out what actually happened. This has been Your Camera is Not the Problem. I'm Joseph Nuzzo, and remember, better photography starts before the shutter button.